From presidential memorabilia to a legendary guitarist's prize relic, and even one of the most jaw-dropping purchases in the show's history, these are 8 most stupidly expensive items ever bought in Pawn Stars history. Starting with Season 16, Episode 4, Allison walked into the shop looking to sell what she thought was a decorative art piece from her grandfather's art collection, and she was hoping to get a substantial amount of money to fund her Hawaii vacation.
If I'm able to make a deal, I'm getting a mommy makeover and going to Hawaii.
The dinosaur bone caught Rick's attention, and he immediately called on a paleontologist expert, Andre Lujan, to verify the authenticity of the bone and find out what dinosaur it came from. And what they discovered shocked the owner herself.
So this bone, this is definitely real.
Okay.
Allison wanted a hefty price for the item, but Andre had some bad news about some parts of the dinosaur bone.
The carpals, these are real.
All right.
If it were cast, this would be much lighter, so that's great.
His valuation of Allison's dinosaur bone was far off from the initial price she wanted.
If this thing came into my museum, I'd be very comfortable appraising it at $25,000.
So, Rick had to do some renegotiating.
1,000.
I'll give you 15 grand for it.
How about 20?
After some back and forth, Allison struck a deal,
That's my top dollar.
Sold.
walking away with less than half of what she wanted for the dinosaur bone. This left the majority of the viewers amazed, with some saying, "We're just gonna ignore the fact that this woman's grandfather got a whole dinosaur leg?" As impressive as that was, it's nothing compared to the next item, which is less than half the size, but almost double the price. In the 6th season of the show, Paul walked into the shop to sell items that had been collecting dust in his closet for almost 3 decades.
My father was an art historian, and he bought these about 25 years ago.
He had heard some news about Andy Warhol paintings and was hoping he could cash in on that opportunity.
And I heard that Warhol just sold for $36 million, so I dusted them off.
These paintings weren't famous compared to Warhol's other works. In fact, they were early pieces from the 1950s before he became the king of pop art, and they weren't in pristine condition either. Although there was water damage, Paul was still hopeful he'd be able to sell it for a decent price.
I was looking to sell them,
Okay.
and I was asking about $8,000 each.
While Rick was interested in the paintings because of the potential they held, he still needed to call in an expert to confirm that these paintings are genuine Andy Warhol paintings. Despite the condition of the paintings, the expert valued them to be potentially worth a substantial amount.
Value-wise, I think on all of these, you probably start at the auction level at around $10,000. I could see these selling at auction even in the $15,000 range. So.
And after some negotiating, Rick was able to cut down Paul's initial asking price.
How about 25,000?
How about 27? You gotta do.
All right, 27,000.
All right.
The opinions on this sale were divided among the viewers, with some pointing out that the pieces weren't prints but ink blot pieces that were hand-done by Warhol and were much more than Rick paid the seller. Keep something long enough and it might surprise you. Just like these next items that turned out to be one of the largest investments in paper currency. In the 2nd episode of Season 15, a collector brought in 2 of the rarest pieces of American currency. One of these 2 notes, a 1918 Federal Reserve $500 and an 1882 $500 gold certificate, came from a time when $500 was a small fortune. Even then, they were rare because few people could afford to use them. Today, they're rarer still, with only a handful left in the world. The collector admitted that while his notes were rare enough to be considered works of art, he was ready to let them go, and he wanted a hefty price for them.
$50,000 for the pair of notes, $40,000 is the least I'm really willing to sell them for.
Meanwhile, Rick acknowledged that although the notes looked like the real deal, he needed to make sure they were. There was some tension between the expert and collector regarding price, but they both agreed that the 1918 series Federal Reserve $500 note was what they'd hoped.
Can you and I disagree without being disagreeable?
Sure.
I do think it grades higher than that, between us.
I get that quite often.
However, there were some concerns over the older 1882 gold certificate.
This has seen some restoration work quite well. The corners look like they've been rebuilt. During that time, it was probably washed lightly, not too harsh.
Despite these concerns, the collector was firm on his initial asking price. but after some negotiating, they finally agreed on a pretty healthy chunk of change.
And it makes no sense for me to give you a dime more than that.
All right, you got a deal.
These notes are, without a doubt, exceptional pieces of history, but they do not measure up to this next item that was brought for even more money. In Season 8 of the show, legendary guitarist Vic Flick walked into the shop, and what he was carrying had Rick in awe. Rick revealed his earliest memories of this vintage guitar, but Vic's impressive accomplishments as a musician quickly revealed that this was no ordinary vintage guitar. On its own, the guitar was already worth a lot, but its association with the James Bond franchise and other notable works elevates its value even further.
I worked on films. I worked on Goldfinger, James Bond. Actually played the James Bond theme, which...
You played the James Bond theme?
Yes.
Proud of his accomplishments, Vic wanted a boatload of cash for his vintage piece of history.
So, how much you looking to get out of it?
$70,000.
However, Rick wasn't keen on making any offers until he did his homework. While Rick was oblivious to who Vic Flick was, his expert wasn't.
Honor to meet you. Honor
Well,
to meet you.
thank you, Jesse.
You helped teach Jimmy Page.
I helped Jimmy Page.
And his valuation of the guitar is right on the money.
I could see this going to a collector at auction easily $60,000, $70,000.
But Rick, being the shrewd negotiator, managed to beat down Vic's initial asking price by a substantial amount.
Go 60?
I will go $55,000. I think that's a fair price. I take all the... All right.
Deal.
Chris couldn't help but talk about how Vic portrayed himself, saying, "This guy is 50 times more famous and more important than he portrays himself to be. That right there is true modesty and humility. What an absolute legend." Unfortunately, Vic Flick passed away in November 2024 due to complications from Alzheimer's disease. His death, while tragic, could make this guitar even more historically significant and more valuable, just like the next item, which used to be owned by a late US president. In Season 7, Episode 33, Eric, a private museum owner, walked into the shop with what might be one of the most notable items in the show's history. This was not only a small cigar box owned by President Kennedy. In fact, it spent time with him while he sat in the Oval Office. And Eric also had a compelling story about how it ended up in his possession. Rick pointed out that another JFK cigar box had been sold for a staggering amount.
All right. His personal cigar box sold for over $500,000 to the guy who owns Cigar Aficionado magazine.
But Eric argued that this was even more special. Rick had concerns about the cigar box and especially the cigars. However, he didn't want to let it go because he knew it was something of real value.
This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime items. If I let this thing walk out the door, I'm never going to see another one like it.
Fortunately, Eric was able to provide some documentation to prove that the cigar box was the real deal. But his asking price seemed to be way too much for Rick, especially for his son Corey, who decided to walk out on it.
I'll give it to you for $95,000.
I think the auction estimate was 100 and it didn't meet it.
I wouldn't pay more than 50 grand, Pops.
I'll go 60.
All right. It's all on you.
Eventually, Eric and Rick settled on a price, providing that Eric could provide more documentation to support his claim to the ownership of the cigar box and its authenticity. Fans of the show were elated to see this purchase, pointing out that JFK's cigar box is still one of the coolest items to walk into the shop. However, for gearheads, it would not be as cool as this next item, of which there are only 112 examples in the world. When Uncle Phil walked into the shop in episode 16 of the 4th season, Rick knew he had his hands on a gem. This was an item so rare that it brought the old man out of his office. Uncle Phil wanted to get rid of the car because he felt it needed to be seen more, and he was asking for 6 sweet figures.
I want to sell the car for $100,000.
The classic car represented incredible luxury during America's worst crisis, and it was so impressive that it got a nod of approval from the old man.
This is a classic car, Rick.
However, as impressive as it was, Rick couldn't help but point out some imperfections, which is expected considering the age of the car. He reveals that in perfect condition, the car could sell for almost double Uncle Phil's asking price.
In perfect condition, this could sell as high as 170 grand at auction.
But with the state the car was in, he really wasn't willing to pay that much.
Overall, it's 95%, but that other 5% is going to cost me 10 grand.
Uncle Phil wasn't willing to go back on his initial asking price.
I'll give you 90,000.
No, I'll take 100,000.
And even threatened to leave with his prized possession.
No, I don't think so. I think I'm going to take it home.
Rick grew frustrated with Uncle Phil's refusal to budge, but in a twist, Uncle Phil considered selling the car, though it came with one condition.
I know you have a lot of gold, and I'd like to trade it for gold.
Rick admitted that Uncle Phil's ask was smart, and while there were some legal hurdles regarding the ask, he managed to find a way around them. Before agreeing to Uncle Phil's terms, Rick made one last attempt to lower the price, and this time, Uncle Phil gave in.
We take 95?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Deal.
Here we go. I think gold is the best investment you can make today. The dollar doesn't buy much nowadays, and everybody's after gold.
Viewers couldn't help but admire Uncle Phil's move, saying it was very smart to trade for gold. While Uncle Phil was walking out with a sack of gold, someone else walked into the shop with over 200 pounds of his precious metal collection. In Season 6, Episode 11, Jeff walked in with one of the most physically impressive purchases in Pawn Stars history. So striking, it even pulled the old man out from behind his desk. Jeff was able to amass this much silver due to advice from his father, and he was looking to sell it for at least its face value.
Dad always taught me to invest, and so I'm here today to cash in on that investment.
And he had bought this when silver was at its lowest. Now there's an increased demand for it due to its use in electronics, and Jeff was selling at the right time.
Just about every cell phone, every computer, television, they all started needing silver.
However, the old man stressed that buying Jeff's silver haul was going to be a challenge.
This was going to be difficult to buy.
And they had to make sure that they weren't getting conned.
Drill a few holes in it, take the shavings out, melt them down, make sure it's all silver.
After a somewhat lengthy testing process, Rick confirmed that this was the real deal.
Yeah, it's all right, it's fine.
However, Jeff was disappointed with Rick's valuation and was hoping to get more money.
You can't go like 115?
No.
While Rick explained that the profit margin was too low, Jeff was hoping the shop would play the long game like he did so he could get more money.
Can't you just hold all this for 6 months, a year, and sell it for 120?
After a very short negotiating spell, Rick moved up his offer to round things off, but Jeff was still trying to hold out for more. However, when he was faced with the option of transporting all that silver in search of a better deal, he caved in and still made a huge profit on his initial investment in the silver.
111 sounds good to me.
All right, it's deal, 111.
While that was a hefty price for an equally hefty haul, it still wasn't the most expensive purchase in Pawn Stars history. That honor belongs to the final item on the list. In Season 15, Episode 15, Rick wasn't waiting behind the counter. This time, he left the shop and headed to a local gallery, determined to check out a piece he had his eye on. These artworks are the actual drawings that created one of the most beloved children's books of all time. These illustrations are so rare because the artist, Maurice Sendak, never sold any of the original artwork from the book during his lifetime. But the owner, Nick, doesn't obviously share the artist's sentiment.
These are all original illustrations. Everything is one of a kind.
These are amazing.
From his comments, it was clear that Rick admired both the books and the illustrations. He was ready to buy as long as the price was right. Nick spoke about the condition of the art and how he acquired them.
So where in the world did you get these?
Well, a friend of mine acquired them from a university professor in about 1974. He sold them to me.
And he wanted a significant amount for it.
Value of the collection adds about $375,000.
That number shocked Rick, but he was willing to take a chance on the art.
This guy wants $375,000. I'm thinking in my head, that might not be a bad deal.
However, he decided to seek the opinion of an expert to ensure he's about to make the right call. The appraisal from Rick's expert turned out to be below Nick's asking price.
I think you can probably get about $310,000 to collector.
And Rick started his negotiation with a price that made Nick counter immediately. After some intense back and forth, Rick gave in and agreed to an eye-watering price.
I'll give you $240.
How about $250?
I can't believe I'm doing this, but you got a deal.
Awesome.
This move surprised viewers who were shocked that Rick actually bought something expensive. This was Rick's biggest single investment in the show's history, and it proved he's willing to take huge risks for truly one-of-a-kind cultural artifacts.